Fend the Thousand Steps Font 5 Part I. The Culling the Hab blocks Vox casters crackled to life at 0-400 hours, as they did every morning, but today the imperial hymns were absent. Instead, a single voice, calm, bureaucratic, devoid of inflection, echoed through the Pharaoh, concrete warrens of Hive Septimus. Citizens of Manufacturing Sector 773. Quota compliance has fallen below acceptable parameters. The Adeptus Administratum, in its infinite wisdom and mercy, has deemed corrective measures necessary. All citizens between the ages of 16 and 40, 5 standard Terran years, are to report to Processing Station 12 for mandatory genetic and spiritual evaluation. This is not a request. The God Emperor protects. Mara Quintus heard the announcement through the thin walls of her sleeping alcove, the words filtering through layers of rust and generations of industrial grime. She was already awake, had been for hours, staring at the corroded ceiling while her younger brother Peter wheezed in the darkness beside her, his lungs struggling against the toxic particulates that hung perpetually in the Hive's lower levels like a mourning shroud. She was 23 years old. She had never seen the sun. Mara. Peter's voice was small, frightened. He was 14, too young for the culling, but old enough to understand what it meant. "They're gonna take you, aren't they?" She wanted to lie to him. The words formed in her throat. "No. Everything will be fine, the Emperor protects." But they died before reaching her lips. Mara had been raised in the shadow of the corpse processing plant, had spent 8 years working the rendering vats where the dead of the Hive were reduced to their component elements A proteins. For the ration manufactorums, minerals for the forge complexes, water for the recyclers. She had learned early that truth was currency in the darkness, more valuable than lies that would inevitably corrode. "Maybe," she said, reaching out to find his hand in the black. His fingers were cold, the knuckles swollen from early, onset industrial arthritis. "But if they do, it's for the Emperor. There's honor in that." The lie sat bitter on her tongue. Processing Station 12 had once been a cathedral, back when Hive Septimus still pretended to architectural grandeur. Now it was simply another administrative complex, its stained glass windows long since shattered and replaced with corrugated steel, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that never fully retreated, even under the harsh glare of sodium lamps. Mara stood in a line that stretched for kilometers, a river of humanity shuffling forward with the inexorable patience of the damned. The air stank of unwashed bodies and fierce sweat, punctuated by the occasional wail of a child or the mechanical drone of servo skulls overhead. Their augmetic eyes recording everything, their Vox units occasionally barking commands to keep the line moving. "Don't make eye contact," whispered the woman ahead of her, an older factory worker with chemical burns scouring half her face. "The arbitrators, I mean. Don't give them a reason to remember you." Mara nodded, though she wasn't sure it mattered. She had seen enough cullings to know that selection was rarely about individual behavior. The Imperium didn't care about your hopes, your dreams, your small acts of kindness or cruelty. It cared only about quotas, about numbers balanced against other numbers in ledgers maintained by people who would never visit a place like Hive Septimus, who made their calculations in climate, controlled offices thousands of light years away. The line crept forward. Hours passed. A man 3 rows over collapsed from dehydration. Nobody helped him up. A woman gave birth standing in line. The infant's first cries swallowed by the general murmur of crowd noise. She wrapped it in her shift and kept moving forward, leaving a trail of blood that the servo cleaners would eventually scrub away. Finally, after 14 hours of standing, Mara reached the processing station. The administratum clerk who greeted her might have been male or female. The bulky hazmat suit and respirator made it impossible to tell. They consulted a data slate, stylus scratching across the surface with a sound like insects dying. Name: Mara Quintus. Manufacturing Sector 773, Residential Block 41, Alcove 666. Age: 23 standard. Occupation: Corpse processor, third class. Rendering division. The clerk made a notation. Genetic markers. Mara recited the string of numbers and letters tattooed on her left forearm, the genetic fingerprint that defined her existence in the Imperium's vast ledgers. The clerk cross-referenced it against their data slate, and Mara saw something flicker across the screen. A designation in harsh red Gothic script. "Proceed to Gate 7, the clerk said, their voice utterly flat. "Report to the Medicus station for full evaluation. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects," Mara echoed, though the words felt like ashes in her mouth. To Gate 7 led to a medical facility that made the processing station look pristine by comparison. The walls were slick with condensation and something darker, more visceral. The smell was overwhelming. Disinfectant and decay, the copper tang of blood, and the acrid stench of cauterized flesh. Mara fought the urge to vomit as she was herded into a holding pen with perhaps 100 others, all bearing the same lost, terrified expressions. A medica servitor approached, its human torso grafted to a multi-limbed mechanical chassis, its face hidden behind a Baroque surgical mask. Mechadendrites equipped with various instruments, needles, scanners, cutters, extended toward her with the blind purpose of a insect's mandibles. "Subject prepare for examination," it droned in binary cant translated through a Vox unit. "Resistance is inefficient. The Omniseia sees all. The Emperor protects." The examination was thorough, invasive, and utterly dehumanizing. Blood samples, genetic sequencing, spiritual purity assessments administered via devices that looked like torture implements and might well have been. Mara endured it all with the numb dissociation she had learned in the rendering vats, where the only way to survive was to separate yourself from your body, to become simply a set of hands performing necessary functions. When it was finished, the servitor branded her left shoulder with a mark, a stylized Aquila within a gear, still smoking, the flesh beneath bubbling and weeping. Then it moved to the next subject, and Mara was left to stumble toward another holding area, this one divided into sections marked with high Gothic numerals. She had been branded with a VI. "Whack, they call it the tithe," said an old man in her section, his voice rough from years of chemical exposure. His eyes were milky with cataracts, his hands trembling with palsy. He had the number VI burned into both shoulders, suggesting this wasn't his first culling. The soul teeth, specifically, different from the guard recruitment or the labor levies. "This is different." "Different how?" asked a young woman, barely 16, clutching a religious icon so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The old man's laugh was bitter, broken. "You really don't know." "Neither did I, the first time. Thought I was going to serve on a warship, see the stars, fight the Emperor's enemies. That's what they tell you, right? That's the story they feed the hives to keep production up. So what really happens?" Mara asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Holy Terra," the old man said simply. "They're sending us to Holy Terra." A murmur ran through the group. Terra, the throne world, the cradle of humanity, the seat of the god, Emperor's power. To set foot on sacred Terra was the dream of billions, a pilgrimage that vanishingly few would ever achieve. "But that's an honor," someone said hesitantly. The old man's expression made it clear what he thought of that interpretation. "Sure, an honor. Keep telling yourself that when they strap you into the feeding tubes, when they wire your consciousness into the machine, when you feel yourself being consumed. The word fell into the space between them like a stone into still water. "The golden throne," the old man whispered, and now his voice carried a weight that made Mara's skin crawl. "It's dying, has been for 10,000 years, and the only thing keeping the Emperor, blessed be his name, alive is us. Psychers, mostly, but they take normals too when the quota demands it. Thousands every day, maybe tens of thousands. Fed into the machine like fuel into a furnace, burned up to keep the Astronomicon lit, to keep his corpse animated for one more second, one more minute, one more day. That's heresy," the young woman said, but her voice wavered. "Is it?" the old man's milky eyes fixed on her with unexpected intensity. Or is it the most sacred truth of the Imperium, that our God Emperor demands sacrifice beyond prayer, beyond devotion, beyond simple death in battle? He demands our souls, our literal, actual souls, fed into his machine to sustain his own life, and we give them 10,000 years of souls, burned like promethium to keep the light burning. Silence fell over the group. Mara felt something cold settling in her chest, something that might have been terror or might have been a strange, terrible understanding. "You escaped," she said to the old man. "Last time." "How?" His laugh was devoid of humor. "Escaped? No, they sent me back. Insufficient psychic resonance. My soul wasn't nutritious enough, I suppose. So they branded me and sent me home to breed, to produce offspring who might have stronger gifts. And now, 40 years later, here I am again. Third culling. Third chance to fuel the god Emperor's pyre." He pulled aside his ragged shirt, revealing not just the VI brand, but a lattice of scar tissue across his chest and abdomen. Surgical scars, precise and purposeful. They take pieces, you see, even if you're not selected for the final tithe. Organs for the Mechanicus. Genetic material for the breeding programs. Bone marrow for the Astartes gene, seed processing. Nothing is wasted in the Emperor's service. Nothing. "The Emperor protects?" Someone whispered. The refrain automatic, desperate. "Yes," the old man agreed, settling back against the cold wall. "He protects. And we pay the price for that protection? Every second of every day. That's the bargain, whether we knew we'd made it or not." Talfarn Fee Part I, the black ship, the transport that came for them 3 days later, was not a ship in any recognizable sense. It was a void, blackened cathedral of metal and stone large enough to house a small city, its flanks adorned with statues of weeping angels and Gothic script that proclaimed glory to the god, emperor, and damnation to his enemies. The Black Ship. Mara had heard of them, of course. Everyone in the Imperium had heard of them. They were the League of Black Ships, the silent fleet that plied the void between worlds, gathering up those with the sight, the curse, the gift, psychers, witches, those whose souls burned too brightly or too strangely to be left among normal humanity. But the old man had been right. They didn't take only psychers. They took others too, when the quotas demanded it. They were herded aboard through a cargo ramp that could have accommodated tanks, processed through security checkpoints that screened them with devices that made Mara's teeth ache and her bones hum, then sealed into massive holding cells that could have held thousands, but currently contained only their group of perhaps 300 souls. The journey to Terra would take months, possibly years. Warp travel was unpredictable at the best of times, and these were not the best of times. The cell was a cavern of black iron and dark stone, lit by sodium lamps that cast everything in shades of yellow and shadow. There were no beds, no furniture, just the bare floor and walls. A single aquatic recycler dripped in one corner, its output barely sufficient for the crowd. Food, if the nutrient paste dispensed twice daily could be called food, came through tubes in the wall, measured to provide exactly enough calories to sustain life and no more. They existed in a perpetual twilight, never quite sure if it was day or night, sleeping when exhaustion overcame them, waking to the same unchanging scene. People wept. People prayed. People coupled in dark corners with the desperate urgency of those who sensed their mortality approaching. Fights broke out over food, over water, over nothing at all. Mara found herself gravitating toward the old man. His name, she learned, was Crassus, and he had been a shift supervisor in a promethium refinery before his first culling. He seemed to have made a kind of peace with his fate, or perhaps he had simply passed beyond the point where fear could touch him. "Tell me about Terra," she said one sleep cycle, needing something to focus on besides the oppressive darkness and the quiet sobbing that provided the cell's constant soundtrack. Crassus was silent for a long moment, his blind eyes staring at something only he could see. "I never saw much of it, really. They keep the tithe, folk isolated, for good reason. Can't have us wandering around the cradle of humanity. reminding the High Lords and the upper Hive nobles that the foundation of their civilization is built on a mountain of corpses. But you saw something. Yeah, I saw something. He shifted, wincing as his damaged joints protested. The ship came in through one of the smaller orbital plates. There are thousands, circling the planet like a crown of thorns. Terra itself, it's dead. Mara, truly dead. Whatever you've heard about it being a paradise, a garden world, a jewel, forget it. The whole planet is one massive hive city from pole to pole. Mountains ground down to slag, oceans evaporated or buried under adamantium. The sky is brown with pollution when you can see the sky at all. He coughed, the sound wet and painful. But the palace, Emperor's Mercy, the palace, it covers half a continent, towers that reach into orbit, walls that could withstand star fire, and at its heart, buried under layers of bureaucracy and security and 10,000 years of accumulated Baroque madness, is the Sanctum Imperialis, the inner palace, the place where he sits. The Golden Throne, Mara whispered. The Golden Throne? Crassus confirmed. I never saw it, of course, never got that close. But I felt it. Everyone feels it. It's like standing next to a star, a dying star, maybe, but still burning with a light that makes your soul want to crawl out of your body and throw itself into the flames. It's glorious and terrible and beautiful and horrifying all at once. And it's hungry. So hungry. What happened to you before they sent you back? Crassus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the general murmur of the cell. They took us into the under-palace, down through levels that predate the Imperium. Ancient. Some parts might be from the dark age of technology, maybe even older. Stone and metal fused together in ways that make no sense. Machines that whisper in languages nobody remembers. And the smell, like ozone and burning hair and something sweet, like flowers rotting. They separated us into groups based on the evaluations. The strong psychers, the ones with real power. They went one way. I never saw them again. The rest of us, they ran more tests. So many tests. Needles in the spine to measure soul resonance. Machines that made you see things, terrible things, to gauge your spiritual resilience. Priests chanting in high Gothic while they carved prayers into your flesh to see how you healed. He pulled up his shirt again, and in the dim light Mara could see the scars he had shown them before, but now she noticed the words carved between them. Tiny, Gothic script, hundreds of lines of it, covering nearly every inch of skin. The Lord's Prayer, the Fide Imperialis, the Litany of Protection, prayers to ward against daemons and witches and heretics. When they determined I wasn't psychically active enough, they harvested. That's the word they used. Harvested. Like I was a crop, not a person. Took my left kidney, part of my liver, bone marrow from my sternum and pelvis. They were very efficient about it. Very precise. The Mechanicus priests, who did the work, barely seemed human themselves. More machine than man. Speaking in binaric cant, treating my body like it was just another broken cogitator to be stripped for parts. And then they threw me back, loaded me onto a prison ship bound for the fringes, and dumped me back on Septimus with a warning that I was still valuable, that the Imperium might call on me again. And they did. They did. The weeks blurred together. Mara lost count of how many days they spent in transit. The black ship shuddered periodically as it translated in and out of the warp, each transition accompanied by a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in the bones rather than the air. During these moments, people screamed. Some claimed to see things moving in the shadows, reaching out with hands that weren't quite hands, whispering promises in voices that sounded like loved ones but wrong, twisted, corrupted. The young woman who had clutched the religious icon. Her name was Sira, attached herself to Mara like a limpet, terrified of the dark, terrified of the journey, terrified of everything. Mara found herself acting as an unlikely protector, sharing her meager rations, fending off unwanted attention from some of the more aggressive prisoners. It gave her something to focus on besides her own spiraling dread. Do you think it hurts? Sira asked one night, curled against Mara's side for warmth. When they use us. Mara had been wondering the same thing, but hadn't wanted to voice the question. I don't know. Frassus makes it sound like the worst thing in the universe. But maybe it's glorious. Maybe we ascend, somehow, become one with the Emperor. Eh? Maybe? Mara said, though she didn't believe it. The truth was, she had been doing math in her head. Terrible, inexorable math. The Imperium spanned 1,000,000 worlds, maybe more. Even a modestly sized planet like Septimus held billions of souls. If every world paid the soul tithe, if even a fraction of a percent of humanity was sacrificed to the Golden Throne, tens of thousands of souls per day, possibly hundreds of thousands, for 10,000 years. The numbers were astronomical, incomprehensible. A mountain of corpses that would dwarf the Hive cities of 100 worlds. And yet the Imperium endured, and the Emperor endured, and the light of the Astronomicon burned across the galaxy, guiding ships through the howling madness of the warp. This was the price. This had always been the price. Planetary approach came without warning. One moment they were in the cell, enduring another meal of nutrient paste, and the next the walls were shaking as the black ship burned through an atmosphere. Alarms blared. Servo skulls descended from hidden alcoves, their mechanical voices chanting litanies of arrival and preparation. On your feet! Form lines! Those who cannot stand will be carried! This is Holy Terra, cradle of humanity, throne of the God Emperor. You will show respect, or you will be shown correction. Armed ratings in void-hardened carapace armor appeared at the cell entrances, shock mauls in hand, faces hidden behind reflective visors. They herded the prisoners into ragged columns, culling out those too weak or sick to walk, dragging them away to an unknown fate. Mara grabbed Sira's hand and kept moving, staying close to Crassus as they were marched through corridors that seemed to stretch for kilometers. Through viewports she caught glimpses of Terra itself, a dead world wrapped in smoke and metal, its surface an endless landscape of manufactorums and processing plants and hab. Blocks stacked so high they vanished into the brown, gray clouds, and above it all, dominating the horizon like a god made manifest in stone and gold, the Imperial Palace. Crassus had not done it justice. No words could. It was beyond scale, beyond comprehension. A structure so vast that it generated its own weather systems. So ancient that parts of it predated human spaceflight. So adorned with statuary and Gothic architecture that it resembled less a building and more a mountain range carved by angels into a hymn of devotion. They landed somewhere in the palace's lower reaches, a void, port the size of a continent, where ships from across the galaxy disgorged their cargo of human souls. The black ship was just one of hundreds, perhaps thousands, all performing the same function, all feeding the endless hunger of the Golden Throne. The processing began immediately. Cape Hart Davi. The palace, they were taken down through elevators that shuddered and groaned under the weight of centuries, down through corridors lined with statues of saints and heroes whose names had been worn away by time and touching hands, down through checkpoints where weapons were scanned, bodies were scrutinized, and the spiritually impure were separated from the merely doomed. The deeper they went, the older everything became. The walls changed from pharaoh, concrete to stone, from stone to metal, from metal to something that might have been crystal or glass or some substance that defied classification. The air grew thick, oppressive, charged with an energy that made Mara's hair stand on end and her teeth ache. And everywhere, there were people. Not just the prisoners, though there were thousands of those shuffling in long lines that snaked through the ancient corridors, but also functionaries, servitors, priests, and things that might have been human once but were now so augmented with machinery and surgical modification that they resembled nothing so much as animated statues. They moved with purpose, never acknowledging the prisoners, going about their duties with the mechanical precision of those who had performed the same tasks for so long that they had become reflexive. The Adeptus Astronomica, Crassus murmured, gesturing to a group of figures in black robes adorned with silver stars. They manage the tithe, sort the wheat from the chaff, as it were, determine who burns and who provides other services. One of the robed figures turned at his words, and Mara caught a glimpse of what lay beneath the hood. Not a face, but a mask of silver and gold, featureless save for a single red lens where an eye should be. The figure regarded them for a moment, then turned away, apparently satisfied. They were herded into an antechamber that might once have been a throne room or a cathedral. The ceiling was lost in shadow, hundreds of meters overhead. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a statue of the emperor in various incarnations, the unifier, the conqueror, the lord of humanity. In each statue, his eyes seemed to follow them, and Mara felt the weight of his gaze like a physical pressure against her soul. Primary evaluation, announced a voice through unseen vox casters. Subjects will be divided by psychic resonance. Those with alpha grade resonance will proceed to channel 7, beta grade to channel 5, gamma grade to channel 3, all others to channel 1. Resistance will result in immediate termination. The Emperor protects. Servitors moved among them, these ones equipped with strange devices that hummed and crackled with barely contained power. They pressed the devices against each prisoner's forehead, and readings appeared on attached data slates. Most showed little or no psychic activity, normal humans like Mara, whose souls burned with ordinary light. But here and there, the readings spiked into higher registers. When they reached a man in his 30s, a former miner from the looks of him, the device shrieked and sparked. The man screamed, his eyes rolling back in his head, and suddenly he was wreathed in foxfire, and blue flames that cast no heat but made the air itself seem to warp and twist. The servitor staggered back, and armed guards descended immediately, their weapons, strange rifles that crackled with psychic nullifying energy, leveled at the man. "Alpha! Grade manifestation!" someone shouted. "Contain and isolate!" But it was too late. The man's scream intensified, and reality itself seemed to tear around him. Mara saw things in that tear, impossible geometries, colors that had no name, shadows that moved independently of any light source. She saw eyes, vast and terrible and utterly alien, looking through from somewhere beyond. Then the guards fired, and the man came apart in a burst of psychic energy that left nothing but ash and the smell of burning ozone. The tear in reality lingered for a moment, widening, and through it Mara heard screaming. Not human screaming, but something worse, something that conveyed pain and pleasure and hunger all at once. Then a figure in golden armor emblazoned with prayers and wards stepped forward, a massive sword in its hands, and thrust the blade into the tear. The weapon burned with golden light, and the tear sealed with a sound like shattering glass. "Continue processing," the armored figure said calmly, as if nothing had happened. "One loss is acceptable. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects." The mantra followed them as they were sorted, categorized, divided. Mara was assigned to Channel 1, no psychic resonance, but suitable for other purposes. Syrah was assigned to Channel 3, indicating some latent psychic potential, and she wept as they were separated, reaching out for Mara even as the guards dragged her away. Crassus ended up in the same channel as Mara, along with perhaps 1,000 others. They were marched deeper still, down into levels where the air grew noticeably warmer and the omnipresent hum of machinery became almost deafening. "We're close," Crassus said, and there was something in his voice that might have been awe or might have been terror. "Can you feel it?" Mara could. It was like standing next to a bonfire, feeling its heat on your face, but the heat was spiritual rather than physical. It pulled at something deep inside her, something she hadn't even known existed until that moment. Her soul, perhaps, or whatever passed for a soul in the materialist nightmare of the 41st millennium. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, and Mara saw the truth of the Imperium. To the chamber was beyond vast. It stretched away in all directions, so large that its far walls were lost in haze and distance. The ceiling was a dome of adamantium and crystal, covered in murals depicting the Emperor's conquest of the galaxy, though much of it was obscured by the machinery, because the chamber was filled with machinery. Thousands of tubes, cables, conduits, processing units, each one humming with power, each one serving a single purpose. They fed toward the chamber's center, converging on a structure that dominated everything, that made the scale of the imperial palace itself seem trivial by comparison. The golden throne. It rose like a ziggurat made of gold and crystal and materials that Mara had no names for, covered in prayers written in 1,000 languages, blazing with a light that was simultaneously golden and somehow dark, a light that hurt to look at, but was impossible to look away from. Around its base were rings of machinery, life support systems, psychic amplifiers, reality stabilizers, tended by tech priests who moved with the precision of insects in a hive. And at its apex, barely visible through the brilliant haze, sat a figure. Mara fell to her knees. She couldn't help herself. Every human in the chamber was on their knees, pressing their faces to the cold floor, weeping, praying, overcome by a presence so overwhelming that consciousness itself seemed to buckle under its weight. He was there. The God Emperor, the master of mankind, 10,000 years dead but refusing to die, kept alive by machinery and sorcery and the sacrifice of thousands of souls every single day. She could feel him. Not as a person but as a force, a weight, a pressure against reality itself. He was in agony. She understood that immediately. Whatever life still flickered in that desiccated form was suffering beyond comprehension, a torture that had endured for 100 centuries with no prospect of relief. And yet he endured, because without him the Imperium would collapse, the Astronomicon would fail, and humanity would drown in the darkness. "Behold the Carrion Lord," whispered a voice, and Mara looked up to see a figure approaching. A woman, if it could be called that, wearing robes of midnight black and carrying a staff topped with a human skull. A psyker, clearly, one of the astropaths or perhaps something higher in the psychic hierarchy. "Behold what we have made of our God. 10,000 years of worship, and this is how we preserve his divinity. Through sacrifice, through suffering, through the endless burning of souls to keep his corpse animated for one more second." Heresy. Someone whispered, but the word had no force behind it. Is it? The psyker's laugh was bitter. Or is it the most fundamental truth of the Imperium? That we are a civilization built on death, sustained by death, destined for nothing but death, when the fuel finally runs out and the light goes dark. You came here thinking you would serve, that your sacrifice would mean something. And you will serve. Oh yes, you will serve in ways you cannot possibly imagine. She gestured, and servitors moved forward, each one carrying restraint harnesses, neural interface cables, feeding tubes. The Emperor needs souls, not metaphorically, literally. Souls to burn in his furnace, to power his throne, to keep the Astronomicon lit and the warp at bay. Most of you don't have sufficient psychic potential to burn for long. You'll last minutes, maybe hours at most. But even a brief soul can provide a spark, and 10,000 sparks can sustain the light. "What about the rest of us?" Crassus asked, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his blind face. "You feed the machine in other ways," the psyker said, simply. "Blood for the blood pumps, nutrients for the neural substrates, organic matter for the bioreactors. Nothing is wasted. Every gram of flesh, every drop of fluid, every fragment of bone, all of it goes to sustaining the golden throne and the Emperor who sits upon it. You wanted to serve the God, Emperor. This is service. This is the price of his protection." The servitors began their work. Copy Part IV, the long death. They started with the strongest. A man who had been a soldier once, his body still bearing the tattoos of his regiment, was led forward first. He struggled. But the restraints were adamantium, and the servitors were stronger than any human. They strapped him into a device that resembled a throne in mockery of the golden throne itself. connected neural interfaces to the ports already implanted in his skull, inserted feeding tubes into his nostrils and throat. The process will begin shortly, the psyker said, her voice flat, emotionless. For those with even minimal psychic resonance, you will feel your consciousness being drawn into the throne itself. The Emperor will consume you, not because he wills it, but because he must. Your soul will burn like candle wax, providing a brief moment of sustenance, keeping the light alive for a few seconds more. And for those without resonance, Mara asked, surprising herself with her own courage. The psyker turned to regard her. Behind the mask of authority, Mara thought she saw something else. Pity, perhaps, or simply exhaustion. You burn slower, less efficiently. Your suffering may last longer, but the result is the same. There is no escape, no mercy, no reprieve. Only service unto death and beyond. The machinery activated with a sound like a choir of angels being torn apart. The soldier in the throne began to scream, his body arching against the restraints, his eyes blazing with golden light. Mara could see his soul being drawn out of him, a luminous thread connecting him to the golden throne, feeding into that vast and hungry machinery. It lasted 17 minutes. She counted every second. When it was over, the soldier was still breathing, but nothing remained behind his eyes. The servitors disconnected him and dragged him away, and another prisoner was brought forward. One by one, they burned. Mara watched it all, unable to look away, bearing witness because someone needed to remember. Because even in the darkness, even in this mechanized hell, there needed to be someone who saw the truth and carried it forward, even if only in memory. She learned to recognize the different ways people died. The psykers burned brightest and fastest, their souls consumed in blazing conflagrations that left nothing behind but smoking husks. The normals burned slower, dimmer, their life force extracted with methodical precision. Some lasted minutes, others hours. None survived with their minds intact. She saw Sarah brought forward on the third day. The girl was weeping, calling for her mother, begging for mercy that would never come. They strapped her into the throne, and Mara watched as her face went from terror to agony to something beyond either. A transcendent suffering that seemed to hollow her out from within. Her soul was brighter than Mara had expected, burning with a soft blue light that reminded Mara absurdly of a gas flame. She lasted 43 minutes. When they dragged her away, Sira's eyes found Mara's for just an instant, and in them Mara saw no recognition, no humanity, nothing but a vast and empty darkness. Whatever Sarah had been was gone, consumed in service to the god Emperor. The Emperor protects. On the 7th day, they came for Crassus. The old man went without struggle, his blind face turned toward the golden throne, as if he could see it, as if he had always seen it in his mind's eye, waiting for him all these years. They strapped him in, connected the interfaces, and he began to whisper prayers. Not the official litanies, but something older, more personal. "I forgive you," he said, and it took Mara a moment to realize he was speaking to the Emperor himself. "I forgive you for what you've become, for what you require of us. I forgive you because you're suffering too, aren't you? More than any of us could ever understand. You're drowning in our worship, buried under 10,000 years of prayers and sacrifice, and you reality that shouldn't exist, a negative space between the warp and the materium. There's no navigation here because there's nowhere to navigate to. Then we're trapped." "Yes!" Matthias felt the weight of command crushing down on him. 95,000 souls, 83,000 now. He corrected himself bitterly, all depending on him to find a solution to a problem that had no solution. There has to be something we can do, some way to. The lights on the stratagem flickered and died. Emergency lumens activated, bathing everything in sickly red. And in that red light, they saw that the walls had changed. Where there had been bulkheads and Gothic inscriptions, now there were words. Thousands of them, covering every surface, written in what looked like dried blood names, human names, and dates. Marcus Pruitt, 7763, M40F. Read Harmon aloud. Selena Vorkos, 981, M39, Tiberius Kane, 45, MM38. He looked up, his face ashen. These are the names of people who died in the warp. Lost ships. Lost crews. How many? Matthias asked quietly. Harmon scanned the walls. There were thousands of names visible just in this room. Tens of thousands, maybe more. And as he watched, new names began to appear, written by invisible hands. Adarin Volk U-27, M42, Chirurgeon Hadris, M47 and M42. So the ship was cataloging its own dead, adding them to the eternal roll call of the lost. This is a memorial, Azandra whispered, or a collection. The space between, it doesn't just trap ships, it records them, keeps them. Every soul that's ever been lost in transit, it's all here, cataloged, preserved. We've fallen into the Imperium's graveyard. Then we dig our way out. Matthias said with more conviction than he felt. Engine Seer Vrak, can we restore any power to the drives? Vrak's response came through the Vox, distorted but comprehensible. Negative, Captain. The Engineerium has been compromised. The machine spirits are no longer responding to litanies. They're singing that song, that damned song. And the servitors. He paused, and they could hear screaming in the background. The servitors have remembered their human. All of them. At once. It's chaos down here, Captain. Beautiful, terrible chaos. The Vox cut out with a wet, organic sound that Vox systems should not be capable of making. We're losing the ship, Harmon said. Section by section, deck by deck. Whatever this place is, it's integrating the Edge Maiden of sorrow into itself. Soon there won't be anything left to command. Matthias looked at Navigator Borge. You're the expert on the Immaterium. If we can't escape, can we at least survive? Find a way to exist here, Captain. Isandra's voice was gentle, pitying. Look at the dates on those names. Some of them are from M36, 7,000 years ago. Ships that were lost during the Age of Apostasy, during the Nova Terra Interregnum, during ages whose names we've forgotten. They're all still here. Still lost. Still dying. Time doesn't work the same way in the space between. We could exist here for subjective eternities, dying over and over, never quite finishing the process. That's not an answer. It's the only answer this place offers. Otut, in the lower decks. Tech, Priest Rack made a discovery that would have been significant if anyone still cared about significance. He had been searching for a way to restore power, following damaged conduits deeper and deeper into the ship's infrastructure, into places that shouldn't exist according to the original schematics. And there, in a chamber that his mechadendrites insisted occupied negative space, a room that was somehow both inside the ship and outside reality itself. He found them, the other ships, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, imperial vessels from every era and class, ancient transports from the Great Crusade, Gothic-class cruisers from the War of the Beast, even what looked like a fragment of a Gloriana-class battleship, though those had all supposedly been destroyed or lost millennia ago. They weren't physically present. Vrak was still inside their Maiden of Sorrow, but he could see them overlaid on his position, occupying the same space that wasn't space, all of them trapped in the space between, all of them slowly being digested by whatever this place was. And they were all still crude. He could see them, ghostly figures moving through corridors, manning stations, going through the motions of shipboard life, even though their vessels had been lost for centuries. Some were nearly transparent, barely visible echoes of what they'd been. Others were still vivid, still vital, still believing they might escape. One of them noticed him. A woman, dressed in a navigator's robes of a style not seen since M37, her third eye uncovered and blazing with borrowed light. She walked through the walls of her own ship and stood before Vrak, though she remained slightly translucent, not quite solid. "You're new," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "How long have you been here?" "Hours," Vrak replied through his Vox unit. "We translated from the warp and ended up here. Hours," the woman repeated and laughed bitterly. "I've been here for 3,000 years. Subjective time, anyway. Hard to tell. Sometimes a minute lasts for days. Sometimes centuries pass in a heartbeat. But yes, Approximately 3,000 years since the Elite of Terra fell out of real space and into this place. How have you survived? Survived. The woman looked down at herself, at her translucent form. Is this survival? We're not alive, tech priest. Not really. We're caught between states, pinned like insects in amber. The space between doesn't let anything die properly. It preserves us at the moment of our loss, keeping us fresh for whatever purpose it serves. What purpose? I don't know. Entertainment, maybe. Memory. Or perhaps it's simply the nature of this place. A crack in reality where things fall through and can never quite land. Does it matter? The result is the same. We're trapped forever, watching our ships decay around us, watching our crews slowly lose their minds, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything but endure. Vrak processed this information through his augmented logic engines. 3,000 years of conscious imprisonment. The idea was more horrifying than any daemon he'd ever encountered. There must be a way out, he said. Some weakness in the... There's no way out, the woman interrupted. Don't you understand? That's what this place is. It's the end of hope. Every ship that's ever been lost in transit, every crew that disappeared between the stars, we're all here. All of us. Forever. And now you've joined the collection. She gestured, and Vrak saw them all. Hundreds of phantom ships, thousands of ghostly crew members, all trapped in the same non-space, all going through the motions of life, despite being long past the point where life should have ended. Welcome, the navigator said, to eternity. Fanfi part IVA, the dissolution day 25 ship time, though day no longer had meaning. That this maiden of sorrow had begun to merge with the other lost ships. Bulkheads that should have led to crew quarters instead opened onto the engineering deck of a ship that had been lost during the Horus heresy. Corridors twisted and connected to vessels from different eras, creating a labyrinth of overlapping architecture where past and present existed simultaneously. The crew could no longer tell which ship they were on. A rating might start their watch on the Maiden of Sorrow and end it on the Emperor's Grace, a heavy cruiser lost in Emdred 39. They walked through doors and found themselves in ships that had been destroyed before they were born, talking to crew members who had been dead for millennia, but didn't know it yet. Captain Matthias found himself on the bridge of what his data slate identified as the Righteous Fury, a vessel lost in 723, M138. The bridge crew were still at their stations, still going through the motions of their duties. But their bodies were wrong. Elongated, stretched, their features smeared as if they'd been painted on by an artist who couldn't quite remember what humans looked like. "Captain on deck," one of them said, the words distorted, stretched like taffy. "I'm not your captain," Matthias replied, though he wasn't sure that was true anymore. Was he the captain of the Maiden of Sorrow, or had that identity dissolved along with everything else? "All captains are the same captain," the stretched officer said. "All ships are the same ship. We're all lost together. We've always been lost together." Matthias tried to return to the Maiden's Bridge, but couldn't find it. The corridors had rearranged themselves, connecting to new configurations of old ships. He passed through a medical bay where doctors were still trying to treat patients who had been dead for centuries, their bodies preserved in various states of decay, still breathing, still suffering, unable to complete the process of dying. In one room, he found Chirurgeon Hadris, or what remained of her. She was fused to the wall, her body melting into the bulkhead, her face stretched across the metal surface, but she was still alive, still conscious, her eyes tracking him as he entered. "Captain," she said, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "I can't feel my body anymore. I can't remember what it felt like to have hands, to have a heartbeat. I'm becoming part of the ship. We're all becoming part of the ship. Hold on, Chirurgeon. We'll find a way to." "There's no holding on, Captain." "There's nothing to hold on to. I'm not even sure which ship I'm part of now. I think I might be in 3 or 4 different vessels simultaneously. I can feel their engines humming through my bones. Except I don't have bones anymore, do I? Just the memory of bones. Matthias wanted to help her, wanted to pull her free, but he could see that any attempt would simply tear her apart. She was too integrated now, too much a part of the ship's structure. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. It's almost peaceful. I can hear the song now, the one everyone's been talking about. It's beautiful. It's about loss and longing and the spaces between spaces. It's about all of us, Captain. Everyone who ever got lost. We're all part of the song now." Her eyes closed and her breathing slowed, and she began to hum along with that eternal melody. Matthias left her there. There was nothing else he could do. Navigator Azandra Borge had gone completely insane, or perhaps she had achieved enlightenment. In the space between, the difference was negligible. She sat in what had once been her sanctum aboard this maiden of sorrow, but the room had grown, expanded, its walls now transparent, showing her all the lost ships at once, hundreds of them overlaid in the same impossible space. Her third eye was fully open now, the wrap discarded, and it wept blood continuously as it processed information that no human mind was meant to perceive. "I can see them all," she whispered to Matthias when he found her. "Every ship, every crew, every soul that's ever been lost in transit. They're not gone, Captain. They're here, all of them screaming and singing and crying and laughing, all at the same time, forever. Navigator, I need you to focus. Is there any possible way to—"
Way to what?
"Escape, Captain, we're already escaped. We've escaped from time, from causality, from the burden of linear existence. We're free now, free to exist in all moments simultaneously. Don't you see how beautiful that is?" She stood, and Matthias realized her feet weren't quite touching the floor anymore. She was floating, suspended in the air, her robes drifting around her as if moved by an invisible current. "I can navigate us anywhere," she said. "Everywhere, everywhen. I can guide us through the lost places, through the forgotten spaces, through all the cracks in reality. We can visit every ship that's ever been lost, commune with every soul that's ever fallen through. We can become the space between itself, Captain. We can become eternal. That's not what I want, Navigator. What you want doesn't matter anymore. What any of us want doesn't matter. We've transcended want. We've transcended need. We've transcended everything except existence itself, and existence in this place is... She trailed off, her third eye rolling in its socket, showing her things that made her laugh and weep simultaneously. "It's horrible," she whispered. "And it's magnificent, and we'll never escape it. Never, never, never." She dissolved into a fit of hysterical laughter that echoed through corridors that no longer quite existed. First Officer Harmon organized what remained of the crew into a final defensive position in the ship's cathedral, a vast chamber dedicated to the worship of the god, Emperor, that had somehow remained relatively stable despite the dissolution of everything around it. Approximately 3,000 crew members had gathered there, the survivors, or at least those who still remembered being survivors. They huddled in pews designed to hold worshippers, clutching lasguns and faith in equal measure, while outside the sealed doors, things scratched and whispered and sang. "We hold this position," Harmon announced, his voice carrying through the vaulted space. "The Emperor protects his faithful. As long as we maintain our devotion, as long as we hold to our humanity, we cannot be taken. Do you understand? We cannot be taken." But even as he spoke, he could see the doubt in their eyes, could see some of them already beginning to fade, their bodies becoming translucent like the ghostly crew members they'd encountered from the other lost ships. Chaplain Mordred led them in prayer, his voice strong and unwavering. "The Emperor is my light in the darkness. His will is my shield. His word is my sword. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for his light guards me." The crew repeated the words, but their voices were hollow, going through the motions of faith, because the alternative was to admit that faith had failed them, that the Emperor's protection had limits, that there were places in the universe where even his light couldn't reach. And slowly, inexorably, the cathedral began to change. The statues of saints and heroes started to weep. Not tears of blood, but tears of something darker. Something that looked like liquid shadow. The stained glass windows, which showed scenes from the Emperor's conquest of the galaxy, began to shift, their images transforming into depictions of loss and despair, ships burning in the void, worlds consumed by the warp, heroes falling into darkness. "It's getting in," someone whispered. "Even here, it's getting in! Stand fast!" Harmon commanded. "We are Imperial Navy personnel. We do not break! We do not surrender!" One of the crew members stood up, a rating named Kellier, who had served aboard the Maiden of Sorrow for 7 years without incident. He looked around at the gathered survivors with an expression of profound sadness. "We're not in the Imperium anymore," he said quietly. "The Emperor can't hear us here. His light doesn't reach this far. We're beyond his protection, beyond his sight. We're in the place where hope goes to die." "That's heresy," Mordred declared. Guards restrain him, but no one moved. Because they could all feel it, the truth of Kellier's words settling into their bones like cold water. "It's not heresy," Kellier continued. "It's just fact. We fell through the cracks, and now we're stuck. The Emperor is doing the best he can, but he's not omnipotent. He can't save everyone, and he can't save us." He walked toward the cathedral doors. "Where are you going?" Harmon demanded. "To join the song. I can hear it now. It's calling all of us. Sooner or later, we'll all answer. I'm just doing it on my terms. While I still have terms." He opened the doors. Beyond them was not the corridor they'd sealed against. Beyond them was the warp itself, raw and unfiltered, a sea of madness that should have been impossible to view without instantly going insane. But Kellier didn't go insane. He simply stepped through, and the warp accepted him, and his body dissolved into constituent light, and his consciousness joined the eternal song of the lost. The doors remained open. "Close them!" Harmon screamed. "Someone close the—" But it was too late. The warp began to pour in, not as a tide, but as a presence, filling the cathedral with something that was neither matter nor energy, but pure concept. The concept of lostness, of dissolution, of existing forever in a state of not quite death. The crew began to scream, or sing. It was becoming hard to tell the difference. Tutu, Captain Matthias Crow, found himself alone on what might have been the Bridge of Vius, Maiden of Sorrow, or might have been some composite space assembled from fragments of a dozen different lost ships. He sat in his command throne and tried to remember what it felt like to have purpose, to have a mission, to be something other than a man slowly dissolving into abstract concepts. "Captain's log, supplemental," he said into a Vox recorder that probably wasn't even real anymore. "Day. I don't know what day. Time has lost meaning. The ship has lost cohesion. The crew has lost hope. I have failed them utterly." His voice echoed in the empty bridge, reflecting back to him from surfaces that kept changing their configuration. "By the authority vested in me by the Imperial Navy, I am officially declaring this Maiden of Sorrow lost with all hands. If anyone ever finds this recording, though I suspect no one will, know that we died doing our duty. We died trying to deliver medical supplies to Kolth. We died because the warp is a hell that devours everything it touches, and sometimes devotion isn't enough." He paused, aware that his last words were dangerously close to heresy. But heresy seemed irrelevant now. What did doctrinal purity matter when reality itself had given up on you? "The Emperor protects," he said finally. "Except when he doesn't. And in this place, he doesn't. We're beyond his reach, beyond anyone's reach. We're just lost." He ended the recording and sat in silence, waiting for whatever came next. What came next was the little girl. Sorrow, the entity that had first breached the ship, that had somehow orchestrated their fall into this terrible place. She materialized on the bridge, still wearing her wet white dress, still looking like a drowned child, still smiling with too many teeth. "Hello again, Captain," she said. "Are you ready to join us now?" What do you want? Matthias asked, too tired to feel fear anymore. I want you to understand, she said, sitting on the deck beside his throne like a normal child might sit beside a parent. Want you to know that this isn't punishment. It's not evil. It's just necessary. Necessary for what? For the story to continue. You see, Captain, the Imperium generates loss. Every day, on every world, people lose things, their loved ones, their hopes, their lives. All that loss has to go somewhere. It can't just disappear. So it collects here, in the space between, in the cracks where reality is thin, and it takes form. It becomes us. She gestured, and Matthias saw them all. Not just sorrow, but thousands of entities, each one representing a different type of loss. The lost child, the forgotten soldier, the drowned maiden, the burned city, the silent stars. All of them were here. All of them feeding on the ships that fell through, drawing sustenance from the despair of the lost. Were the Imperium's shadow, sorrow continued, the dark side of all that glory and conquest and faith. For every triumph, there's a tragedy. For every saved world, there's a lost ship. And we're what happens to the lost things. We preserve them, keep them, make them eternal. That's monstrous, Matthias whispered. Is it? Or is it merciful? In the Materium, you would all be dead. Truly dead, gone, forgotten. Here, you exist forever. Changed, yes, transformed, but still existing, still aware. Isn't existence preferable to oblivion? No, Matthias said. No, it's not. Sometimes death is mercy. Sometimes the Emperor's peace is the greatest gift. Sorrow looked at him with eyes that were far older than her apparent age. Then I'm sorry, Captain, because the Emperor's peace doesn't reach this far. Here, there is only us. Only the eternal preservation of loss. Only the song that never ends. She stood and held out her small, wet hand. Join us, Captain. Let go of your flesh and your fear and your futile hope. Become part of the space between. Become eternal, like all the others. Matthias looked at her hand. Then he looked at his bolt pistol, still holstered at his side. He drew it. No, he said simply, and he fired a mass reactive shell through his own skull. But death in the space between doesn't work the same way as death in real space. Matthias felt the round penetrate, felt his skull fragmenting, felt his brain matter,